The coffee cup slipped from Maya Rodriguez's trembling fingers, ceramic shattering against the marble floor of the Meridian Club's private dining room. The amber liquid spread like spilled secrets across the pristine white stone, and for a moment, the only sound in the opulent space was the gentle patter of coffee drops finding their way into the intricate grooves of the Italian marble. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackstone," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the low hum of the restaurant's ventilation system. She dropped to her knees immediately, her black uniform dress pooling around her as she began gathering the larger ceramic pieces with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The sharp edge of one fragment caught her thumb, drawing a thin line of blood that she quickly wiped on her apron, hoping no one would notice. Harrison Blackstone, CEO of Blackstone Industries and one of the most powerful men in the city, barely glanced up from his leather portfolio. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit pressed to perfection, and his attention was entirely consumed by the documents spread before him. "It's fine," he said absently, his voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to being invisible to the help. "Just clean it up quietly." But Maya had heard something in the moments before her clumsiness, something that made her blood run cold and her hands shake with more than just nervousness. As she'd approached the table with the fresh pot of Colombian dark roast, she'd caught fragments of conversation between Blackstone and the three other men seated around the mahogany table. Words that didn't belong together: Meridian acquisition, SEC investigation, offshore accounts, and most chilling of all, they'll never see it coming. Marcus Chen, Blackstone's head of mergers and acquisitions, was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses that constantly reflected the light from the crystal chandelier above. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that Maya could barely catch as she continued gathering ceramic shards. "The Meridian board meeting is Thursday. Once we announce the acquisition publicly, their stock will surge before anyone realizes what's really happening with their books." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. Meridian Corp was where her younger brother Diego had worked for 3 years as a junior accountant, supporting not just himself, but sending money home to help with their mother's medical bills. If what she was overhearing was true, if Meridian was involved in something illegal, and Blackstone Industries was planning to acquire them anyway. "The beauty of it," continued James Morrison, Blackstone's chief financial officer, his Boston accent thick with excitement, "is that by the time the investigation surfaces, we'll have already stripped their valuable assets. The real estate portfolio alone is worth $800 million. We liquidate that, restructure the debt, and if the whole thing collapses afterward, well, that's business." Robert Sterling, the company's legal counsel, adjusted his gold cufflinks and smiled, a cold expression that never reached his pale blue eyes. "The SEC inquiry won't surface for at least 6 months. Our sources inside confirmed that. By then, we'll have extracted everything of value and restructured the acquisition as a series of asset purchases rather than a company buyout. Legally bulletproof." Maya felt sick to her stomach as she carefully placed the ceramic pieces on her serving tray. These men were talking about deliberately acquiring a company they knew was under federal investigation, planning to strip its assets and leave thousands of employees, people like Diego, unemployed and potentially implicated in whatever financial crimes Meridian's executives had committed. The casual way they discussed destroying lives, the pleased tone in their voices as they calculated profits from other people's suffering made her want to scream. She'd been working at the Meridian Club for 2 years, ever since she dropped out of her business degree program at the community college. The private dining rooms of this exclusive establishment had been her classroom in understanding how the wealthy operated, how deals worth hundreds of millions were discussed over wine that cost more than most people made in a month. She'd learned to become invisible, to serve without being seen, to clean up messes while powerful men reshaped the world around their dinner conversations. But this was different. This wasn't just business. This was theft on a massive scale, dressed up in legal terminology and expensive suits. "Maya!" The sharp voice of Gerald Hoffman, the club's dining manager, cut through her spiraling thoughts. He stood in the doorway of the private dining room, his face flushed with the particular shade of red that meant someone important had complained. "What's taking so long?" "Sorry, Mr. Hoffman," Maya said quickly, rising to her feet with her serving tray of broken ceramic. "I'll have this cleaned up right away." "See that you do," Hoffman said, his eyes darting nervously toward the table where the four men continued their conversation in low tones. "These gentlemen are very important clients." As Maya hurried toward the service door, she caught one final exchange that made her blood freeze. The service doors swung shut behind Maya, muffling the sound of their laughter. The sound of men who had never worried about losing a job, never feared for their family's security, never felt the crushing weight of bills they couldn't pay. She stood in the narrow service corridor, surrounded by the institutional beige walls and harsh fluorescent lighting that marked the boundary between the glamorous front of house and the utilitarian reality where people like her worked. The broken ceramic rattled against her tray as she walked toward the kitchen, her mind racing. Diego would be devastated if he lost his job at Meridian, but if the company was really under SEC investigation, he could face much worse than unemployment. He could face criminal charges, his career destroyed, his reputation ruined, all while men like Harrison Blackstone profited from the chaos. In the kitchen, surrounded by the familiar sounds of sizzling pans and shouted orders, Maya dumped the ceramic pieces into the garbage and tried to make sense of what she'd heard. The other servers moved around her with practiced efficiency. Carmen preparing appetizer plates for table 12, David polishing wine glasses until they sparkled, Elena arranging garnishes with artistic precision. These were her people, her colleagues, working multiple jobs to support families and chase dreams that seemed perpetually out of reach. David was studying engineering at night school. Elena was saving every tip to bring her parents from Guatemala. Carmen was paying off her daughter's medical debt from a childhood leukemia diagnosis. They were all fighting every day just to stay afloat in a city where the cost of living seemed designed to exclude people like them. And in the dining room, men in $1,000 suits casually discussed schemes that would destroy thousands of lives while padding their already enormous fortunes. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled to Diego's contact. Her thumb hovered over the call button. What could she tell him? That she'd overheard something at work? That he should be worried about his job? That the company he'd been proud to work for might be involved in federal crimes? But more importantly, what could she do? She was a waitress who dropped out of college, serving coffee to men who controlled billions of dollars. Her word against theirs wouldn't even register as a minor inconvenience in their world. She had no proof, no evidence, nothing but fragments of overheard conversation that could be explained away or denied. The kitchen door swung open and Hoffman appeared, his face still flushed with irritation. "Rodriguez, table 7 needs their wine selection, and for God's sake, don't drop anything else tonight." Maya nodded and reached for the wine list, but her hands were still shaking. As she walked back toward the dining room, passing through the elegant corridors lined with oil paintings of long-dead philanthropists and industrial barons, she felt the weight of impossible knowledge. She knew something that could save her brother's career and protect thousands of innocent employees from financial ruin, but she was powerless to act on that knowledge. The private dining room door opened as she approached, and she could hear Blackstone's voice clearly. "I want this kept absolutely quiet until Monday's announcement. No leaks, no rumors, nothing that could complicate the acquisition timeline." Maya paused just outside the door, wine list clutched in her trembling hands, and realized that she was exactly what Harrison Blackstone feared most, someone who'd overheard their plans, someone who could complicate their timeline, someone who might just find a way to turn their carefully orchestrated scheme into the kind of public relations nightmare that could cost them everything. The question was whether she had the courage to try. If you're finding this story as gripping as I am, please take just 30 seconds to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me bring you more incredible true stories like this one. Maya had always been good with numbers, but those dreams of financial success felt distant now as she stood in her tiny studio apartment at 3 a.m., processing what she'd overheard. But it was hers. After growing up in a house with 6 people sharing 2 bedrooms, after years of never having privacy or quiet or space to think, this tiny apartment represented freedom.
even if that freedom came with the constant anxiety of making rent each month. Maya splashed cold water on her face and tried to push away the memory of the conversation she'd overheard. Harrison Blackstone's words echoed in her mind. They'll never see it coming. The casual cruelty of it, the way he discussed destroying lives as if he were planning a weekend golf game, made her stomach clench with anger and helplessness. She pulled her laptop from the table and settled cross-legged on her bed. The soft glow of the screen illuminated her face in the darkness. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency as she navigated to the financial news website she'd bookmarked during her brief time as a business student. If Harrison Industries was planning to acquire Meridian Corp, there had to be some trace of it in the business press, some rumor or speculation that might give her insight into what she'd stumbled upon.
Maya's business classes had taught her to read between the lines of corporate communications. Companies didn't lose senior executives randomly, especially not in pairs. Stock volatility combined with regulatory scrutiny usually meant one thing: federal investigators were asking uncomfortable questions. She pulled up Meridian's employee directory, which was publicly available through their corporate website, and searched for Diego's name. There he was, Diego Rodriguez, junior accountant, finance department. His profile photo showed his familiar smile, the same grin he'd worn as a kid when he'd figured out a particularly challenging math problem. He looked proud in that photo, wearing his first real business suit, standing in what appeared to be Meridian's lobby with its distinctive glass sculpture visible in the background. Diego had been so excited when he'd gotten the job at Meridian. After years of part-time work and community college classes, after watching their parents struggle with medical bills and unemployment, he'd finally landed a position with a real salary, benefits, and the possibility of advancement. He'd called Maya the night he'd received the job offer, and she could hear the emotion in his voice as he told her he could finally contribute meaningfully to their family's finances. Now that job, that pride, that future, all of it was at risk because of something Diego had no control over and probably didn't even know about. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message, and her heart jumped until she saw it was from Elena, her coworker from the Meridian Club. "Girl, you okay? You looked like you saw a ghost tonight during your shift. Call me if you need to talk." Elena Vasquez had been Maya's closest friend since she'd started working at the club. They were both 24, both from working-class families, both trying to build something better for themselves in a city that seemed designed to keep people like them on the margins. Elena worked 3 jobs: the club, a weekend catering company, and occasional freelance graphic design work, while sending money to her parents in Guatemala and saving for art school. Maya typed back, "Just tired. Long shift. Talk tomorrow?" But even as she sent the message, she knew she wouldn't be able to talk to Elena about what she'd overheard. The information was too dangerous, too explosive. If word somehow got back to the club's management that she'd been eavesdropping on private conversations, she'd lose her job immediately. Worse, she could be sued for violating the confidentiality agreements all employees signed when they were hired. The Meridian Club took privacy seriously. Members paid enormous fees specifically for the guarantee that their conversations and business dealings would remain confidential. Servers, bartenders, and other staff were required to sign agreements that included harsh penalties for any breach of that confidentiality. Maya had signed those papers without really thinking about the implications, focused only on the job's hourly wage and the possibility of decent tips. Now, those agreements felt like chains around her wrists. She closed the laptop and stared out the single window of her apartment. The view wasn't much, a narrow alley between her building and the one next door, with fire escapes creating geometric patterns against the brick walls. But at this hour, with most of the city asleep, there was something peaceful about the emptiness, the temporary silence in a place that never truly stopped moving. Tonight, though, Maya had glimpsed something different. She'd overheard information that could disrupt Harrison Blackstone's carefully laid plans, that could potentially save thousands of jobs and prevent a massive fraud. For the first time in years, she possessed something valuable that the wealthy and powerful wanted to keep secret. The question was whether she had the courage to use it. Maya pulled out her phone again and scrolled through her contacts until she found Diego's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button as she considered what she might say. It was nearly 4 in the morning, too late to call without alarming him, but by Monday, if Blackstone's timeline was accurate, it might be too late for any warning to matter. She set the phone aside and tried to think logically about her options. She could call Diego and tell him what she'd overheard, warn him to start looking for another job. But that wouldn't stop the acquisition or prevent the larger fraud. It would just give Diego a head start on job hunting while thousands of other Meridian employees remained in danger. She could try to contact the Securities and Exchange Commission directly, report what she'd heard as potential insider information or fraud. But she had no proof beyond her word, and federal investigators probably received dozens of tips each day from people claiming to have overheard suspicious conversations. Without documentation or corroborating evidence, her report would likely disappear into a bureaucratic void. She could attempt to warn Meridian's leadership directly, though she had no way to reach them and no reason to believe they'd take seriously a call from a waitress claiming to have overheard sensitive information at a private club.
Or she could do nothing. She could pretend she'd never heard the conversation, continue serving coffee and collecting tips, and hope that somehow the situation would resolve itself without her involvement. It was the safest option, the one that wouldn't risk her job or her family's financial stability. But Maya knew she couldn't live with herself if she chose silence. Every time she saw Diego, every time she read about Meridian employees losing their jobs or facing criminal charges, she'd know that she could have acted and chose not to. Outside her window, the first hints of dawn were beginning to appear, painting the narrow alley in shades of gray and pale gold. Maya had always been an early riser, a habit developed during her college years when she'd studied before her morning classes. There was something hopeful about dawn, something that suggested new possibilities and fresh starts. As the sun rose over the city, Maya made her decision. She might be just a waitress who dropped out of college, but she had something Harrison Blackstone didn't expect, the kind of moral courage that came from understanding what it meant to struggle, to worry about paying bills, to fear for your family's future. She was going to find a way to stop him.
If the SEC investigation uncovered systematic fraud at Meridian, prosecutors would examine every financial document and interview every employee who'd worked on questionable reports. Diego could find himself in federal court, trying to explain his role in preparing documents that contained false information, even if he'd had no knowledge of any wrongdoing. Maya had seen enough crime dramas to know that prosecutors liked to charge as many people as possible, and then offer plea deals to those willing to testify against higher-level defendants. Junior employees often made convenient scapegoats. They were expendable, had limited resources to fight charges, and could be pressured into accepting responsibility in exchange for reduced sentences. The thought of Diego in handcuffs, of her parents crying as they watched their son's perp walk on the evening news, made Maya feel physically sick. She pushed her coffee aside and tried to focus on finding some way to prevent that future from becoming reality. By afternoon, Maya had abandoned her surveillance of the Blackstone building and moved to the public library, where she could use the computers and research databases without worrying about data charges on her phone. The library was busier on Sunday afternoons. Families with children, college students working on papers, elderly residents reading newspapers and magazines they couldn't afford to buy. Maya found an empty computer terminal in the business section and began searching for more detailed information about both Meridian Corp and Blackstone Industries. What she found painted a picture that was both clearer and more troubling than she'd expected. Meridian Corp had been founded 15 years earlier by Thomas Meridian, a charismatic entrepreneur who'd built the company from a small consulting firm into a major player in corporate restructuring and asset management. The company went public 8 years ago, and its stock had performed well until recently, when a series of quarterly reports had raised questions about the sustainability of their business model. Several financial analysts had published reports over the past 6 months questioning Meridian's accounting practices. One article in the Financial Times mentioned aggressive revenue recognition and unusual depreciation schedules that made the company's profits appear larger than they might actually be. Another piece in Bloomberg suggested that Meridian had been using complex derivative instruments to hide debt and inflate asset values. But it was a blog post from a financial investigative journalist named Sarah Chen that provided the most damning details. Chen had spent months analyzing Meridian's financial statements and public filings, and her conclusions were devastating. According to her research, Meridian had been systematically inflating revenues by booking future contract income as current earnings, hiding massive debts through shell companies incorporated in offshore tax havens, and using accounting tricks to make worthless assets appear valuable on their balance sheets. The question isn't whether Meridian Corp has been manipulating their financial reports, Chen had written. The question is how they've managed to avoid federal charges for this long, and whether their auditors and board members were complicit in what appears to be systematic fraud designed to inflate stock prices and enable massive executive bonuses. Maya felt her heart racing as she read Chen's analysis. If even half of these allegations were true, Meridian wasn't just facing an SEC inquiry. They were looking at potential criminal charges that could result in prison sentences for executives and financial ruin for the company. And Harrison Blackstone knew all of this. He'd mentioned having sources inside the SEC, which meant he was aware of the investigation's timeline and scope. He was planning to acquire Meridian precisely because their legal troubles would drive down the acquisition price, allowing Blackstone Industries to strip valuable assets before the company collapsed entirely. It was a brilliant strategy from a purely financial perspective, and absolutely devastating for everyone else involved. Maya clicked through to Blackstone Industries' corporate website and annual reports, looking for insight into the man whose scheme she was trying to disrupt. Harrison Blackstone had built his fortune through what financial journalists politely called distressed asset acquisition, buying struggling companies, extracting valuable resources, and leaving behind empty shells that were eventually dissolved or sold for parts. Over the past decade, Blackstone Industries had acquired dozens of companies in financial trouble, from manufacturing firms hit by foreign competition to retail chains struggling with changing consumer habits. In each case, Blackstone's team would move quickly to sell real estate, liquidate inventory, terminate pension plans, and lay off employees before restructuring what remained into smaller, more profitable units. The financial press generally praised Blackstone's efficiency and business acumen, but Maya found herself reading between the lines of corporate euphemisms. Workforce optimization meant firing people. Asset reallocation meant selling off anything valuable. And structural reorganization meant dismantling companies and destroying the communities that had depended on them for employment. One case study particularly caught Maya's attention. 3 years ago, Blackstone Industries had acquired Hartwell Manufacturing, a company that had been producing automotive parts in Ohio for nearly 50 years. Within 6 months of the acquisition, Blackstone had sold the company's factory buildings, moved production to Mexico, and laid off 800 employees. The local newspaper had run a series of articles about families losing their homes, small businesses closing due to reduced local spending, and a once thriving industrial town slowly dying.
Harrison Blackstone had been quoted in the Wall Street Journal describing the Hartwell acquisition as a textbook example of how strategic restructuring can unlock shareholder value. He'd made no mention of the human cost of that unlocked value. Maya stared at the computer screen, feeling a mixture of anger and determination crystallizing in her chest. She'd spent the morning thinking of Harrison Blackstone as a distant figure, a wealthy man whose schemes were abstract business problems. But reading about the real-world consequences of his previous acquisitions made the situation personal in a way that went beyond her concern for Diago's job. Blackstone wasn't just planning to commit fraud, he was planning to destroy thousands of lives in the process. The employees at Meridian who would lose their jobs, the communities that depended on the company's presence, the investors who would lose their savings when the stock price collapsed. All of them were just collateral damage in Blackstone's pursuit of profit. Maya printed out the most damning articles about both companies, using the library's printer and paying with quarters from her tip jar.
She wasn't sure yet how she was going to use the information, but having physical copies made her feel more prepared for whatever came next. As she walked home through the city's financial district, passing the towering monuments to corporate power that dominated the skyline, Maya felt the weight of what she was contemplating. She was a 24-year-old waitress with an incomplete college education, planning to take on one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. She had no connections, no resources, no legal expertise, and no real plan beyond a desperate hope that truth and determination might somehow be enough. But she also had something that Harrison Blackstone lacked. She understood what it meant to lose everything, to worry about paying rent, to fear for your family's future. She knew the human cost of the kind of schemes that wealthy men discussed over expensive dinners, and she was willing to risk everything to prevent that cost from being paid by people like Diago. Maya's phone rang as she turned onto her street, and she saw Elena's name on the caller ID. "Hey, girl," Elena said when Maya answered. "I've been thinking about you since last night. You seemed really shaken up about something. Want to grab dinner and talk?" Maya paused outside her apartment building, looking up at the narrow window that marked her home. She could tell Elena everything, ask for advice, maybe even recruit her friend's help in whatever came next. Elena was smart, creative, and resourceful, exactly the kind of ally Maya could use in taking on Harrison Blackstone. But involving Elena would also put her friend at risk. If Maya's plan failed, if Blackstone discovered who was working against him, there could be serious consequences for anyone involved. Elena had her own dreams, her own financial struggles, her own family depending on her success. She couldn't ask her to risk all of that for a scheme that might be doomed from the start. "Actually," Maya said, making the decision as she spoke, "I'm pretty tired tonight. Rain check?" "Of course," Elena said, though Maya could hear the concern in her voice. "But call me if you need anything, okay? Whatever's going on, you don't have to handle it alone." After ending the call, Maya climbed the 3 flights and stairs to her apartment and spread the printed articles across her small table. The evidence of Meridian's financial manipulation was compelling, and her notes about Blackstone's acquisition timeline provided a clear picture of the scheme she'd overheard. But evidence wasn't enough. She needed a plan. Maya pulled out her laptop and began drafting an email to Sarah Chen, the financial journalist whose blog post had provided the most detailed analysis of Meridian's accounting irregularities. If anyone would understand the significance of what Maya had overheard, it would be a reporter who'd already been investigating the company. She wrote and deleted several versions of the message, struggling to explain her situation without sounding like a conspiracy theorist or a disgruntled employee making wild accusations. Finally, she settled on a straightforward approach. "Miss Chen, I read your recent article about Meridian Corp's financial irregularities with great interest. I work in the service industry and recently overheard a conversation that suggests certain parties may be planning to acquire Meridian despite knowing about ongoing federal investigations. I believe this information would be of interest to someone investigating the company's business practices. Would you be willing to speak confidentially about what I overheard?" Maya attached her contact information and hit send before she could second-guess the decision. It felt like stepping off a cliff. Once the message was sent, there was no taking it back, no pretending she was just an innocent waitress who happened to overhear something suspicious. She was committed now to whatever came next. Sarah Chen called Maya at 7:30 Monday morning, just as Maya was getting ready for her opening shift at a coffee shop where she worked weekdays before her evening shifts at the Meridian Club. Maya had been awake for hours anyway, too anxious to sleep, alternating between rehearsing what she might say to a journalist and imagining all the ways her plan could backfire catastrophically.
"This is Maya Rodriguez?" Chen's voice was crisp and professional, with just a hint of skepticism that suggested she'd received a lot of tips from unreliable sources. "Yes, thank you for calling so quickly," Maya said, stepping onto the fire escape outside her window, where she could speak privately.
The morning air was cool and sharp, carrying the sounds of traffic and early commuters beginning their day. "Your email was intriguing," Chen said, "but I need you to understand that I can't publish allegations without verification. If you're claiming to have overheard insider information, I'll need details that can be corroborated through other sources." Maya took a deep breath and began recounting Saturday night's conversation, providing as much detail as she could remember about the timeline, the specific comments about SEC investigations, and the men involved in planning the acquisition. She described the setting, the casual tone of the discussion, and the clear indication that Blackstone Industries was planning to profit from Meridian's legal troubles. Chen listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting that Maya repeat specific quotes. When Maya finished, there was a long pause before the journalist spoke again. "What you're describing sounds like securities fraud on a massive scale," Chen said finally. "If Blackstone Industries is planning to acquire a company while possessing material non-public information about federal investigations, that's textbook insider trading. The fact that they're planning to strip assets before the investigation becomes public makes it even worse." Maya felt a surge of relief that Chen was taking her seriously, followed immediately by terror at the confirmation that what she'd overheard was as serious as she'd feared. "The problem," Chen continued, "is that I need more than your testimony to move forward. Blackstone's legal team would destroy any story based solely on overheard conversations. I need documentation, corroborating sources, or some way to verify the timeline you've described." "What about the SEC investigation itself? Can't you confirm that's happening?" "I'd been trying to get confirmation for months. Federal agencies don't comment on ongoing investigations, and Meridian's executives have denied any knowledge of regulatory inquiries. But your information about the timing, 6 months before anything becomes public, that matches what I've been hearing from other sources." Maya's heart was racing as she realized the significance of what Chen was telling her. Her overheard conversation wasn't just criminal. It was the missing piece in a larger investigative puzzle that Chen had already been working on. "There's something else," Chen said. "I've been tracking some unusual trading patterns in Meridian stock over the past few weeks. Someone has been buying large blocks of shares through offshore accounts, which suggests that information about potential acquisitions may already be leaking. If I can connect those trades to Blackstone Industries or their associates, it would provide the kind of documentation I need." Maya felt a glimmer of hope. "What would you need from me?" "I need you to remember everything you can about that conversation. Not just what was said, but who said it, what documents were visible, any details that might help me verify the information through other channels. And I need you to be prepared to go on the record if this story develops. Anonymous sources only go so far in stories about financial fraud." The reality of what Chen was asking hit Maya like a physical blow. Going on the record meant putting her name in a newspaper article that would accuse one of the city's most powerful businessmen of securities fraud. It meant losing her job at the Meridian Club, facing potential lawsuits, and possibly putting herself in physical danger if Blackstone's associates were as ruthless as they seemed. But it also meant potentially saving thousands of jobs and preventing a massive theft disguised as a legitimate business transaction. "I'll think about it," Maya said. "How long do I have to decide?" "Based on what you overheard, Blackstone is planning to announce the acquisition this morning. Once that announcement goes public, stopping the fraud becomes much more difficult. If you're going to act, it has to be soon." After ending the call with Chen, Maya sat on the fire escape and watched the city wake up around her. Office workers emerged from subway stations and walked purposefully toward the glass towers where they'd spend their days making the kinds of decisions that shaped other people's lives. Some of them were probably decent people trying to do good work, but others were undoubtedly involved in the kind of schemes that prioritized profit over everything else. Maya's phone rang again, and this time, the caller ID showed Diego's number. Maya, thank God you answered, Diego said, his voice tight with anxiety. Something weird is happening at work. We just got an email saying there's going to be a special board meeting this morning and all the accountants have been told to prepare complete files on our quarterly reports. People are freaking out. Maya's stomach dropped. What kind of complete files?
Everything. Every spreadsheet, every calculation, every source document. They want everything printed and organized by department within 2 hours. Maya, this feels like the kind of thing that happens before a company gets audited or investigated. What if I've been working on reports that have problems? What if I—
Diego, slow down,
Maya said, trying to keep her voice calm even though her mind was racing.
You haven't done anything wrong. You've been doing the job you were hired to do, using the information your supervisors gave you. Even if there are problems with the company's financial reporting, that's not your responsibility.
But what if they try to blame the junior staff? What if they say we should have noticed discrepancies or questioned the data we were given? Maya, I can't afford to lose this job, and I definitely can't afford to get involved in some kind of legal mess. Maya closed her eyes and made a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff.
Diego, listen to me very carefully. I think Meridian might be in more trouble than you realize, and I think there might be people planning to take advantage of that trouble. I can't explain everything right now, but I need you to do something for me.
What?
Document everything. Make copies of any emails about this board meeting. Keep records of what you're asked to do and who asks you to do it. If anyone tells you to alter reports or delete files, don't do it, and write down exactly what they said. Can you do that?
Maya, you're scaring me. What do you know?
I know that sometimes good people get hurt when powerful people make bad decisions. I'm trying to prevent that from happening to you, but I need you to protect yourself too.
After Diego hung up, promising to be careful and keep detailed records, Maya called in sick to her coffee shop job and spent the morning researching everything she could find about securities fraud cases and whistleblower protections. What she learned was both encouraging and terrifying. Whistleblowers who reported securities fraud could receive substantial financial rewards if their information led to successful prosecutions, sometimes millions of dollars in compensation from recovered funds. But they also faced retaliation from the companies and individuals they exposed, including lawsuits, harassment, and professional blacklisting that could make it impossible to find future employment. The legal protections for whistleblowers were stronger than Maya had expected, but they required navigating a complex federal bureaucracy and often took years to resolve. In the meantime, whistleblowers frequently faced financial hardship and personal danger while waiting for their cases to be adjudicated. Maya was still reading legal websites when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize.
Ms. Rodriguez? This is Agent Jennifer Walsh with the Securities and Exchange Commission. I understand you may have information relevant to an ongoing investigation?
Maya's blood went cold.
I'm sorry, who is this? Agent Walsh, SEC Enforcement Division. I received a call from financial journalist Sarah Chen, who indicated you might have overheard conversations related to potential securities violations. Ms. Chen suggested that your information could be time-sensitive.
Maya's mind raced. Chen had contacted the SEC without telling her, which meant the situation was escalating beyond Maya's control. But it also meant that federal investigators were taking her information seriously.
I'm not sure I should be talking to you without a lawyer. That's absolutely your right. But I want you to understand that if crimes are being committed, time is critical. Every hour we delay gives potential criminals more opportunity to destroy evidence, move money offshore, or complete fraudulent transactions.
Maya thought about Diego preparing files at Meridian, about the thousands of employees who had no idea their jobs were at risk, about Harrison Blackstone sitting in his office planning to announce an acquisition that would make him hundreds of millions of dollars while destroying countless lives.
What would you need from me? I'd like to meet with you this afternoon to take a formal statement. We can arrange for an attorney to be present if you'd like, and we can discuss potential protections available to you as a witness in a federal investigation.
Maya agreed to meet Agent Walsh at the SEC's local office at 2 o'clock. After hanging up, she sat in her tiny apartment and tried to process how quickly her life had changed. 72 hours ago, she'd been a waitress worried about making rent.
Now she was apparently a key witness in a federal securities fraud investigation. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Heard you called in sick. Bringing you soup after my shift. Don't argue." Maya smiled despite her anxiety. Elena's friendship was one of the few constants in her life, a reminder that good people existed even in a world that often seemed dominated by greed and selfishness. At 1:30, Maya dressed in her most professional outfit, a navy blue dress she'd bought for job interviews and rarely had occasion to wear, and took the subway to the Federal Building downtown. The SEC office was on the 20th floor, behind security checkpoints and metal detectors that made the seriousness of the situation undeniably real. Agent Walsh turned out to be a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and the kind of intense focus that suggested she'd spent years pursuing complex financial crimes. She was accompanied by Agent Marcus Rivera, a younger man who took detailed notes while Walsh asked questions. "Before we begin," Walsh said, "I want you to understand that providing false information to federal investigators is a serious crime. But I also want you to know that we take witness protection very seriously, and we have resources available to help people who come forward with information about financial fraud." Maya took a deep breath and began recounting Saturday night's conversation for the third time in 2 days. This time, the questions were more detailed and technical. Walsh wanted to know about the specific documents she'd seen on Blackstone's table, the exact wording of comments about SEC timelines, and any details about the other men involved in the conversation. "You mentioned that James Morrison talked about stripping assets worth $800 million, Walsh said. "Did he specify what kinds of assets?" Maya closed her eyes and tried to remember. "Real estate. He specifically mentioned real estate portfolio, and he said something about restructuring debt so that if the company collapsed, they'd already extracted everything valuable." Walsh and Rivera exchanged glances. "That's consistent with other information we've been developing," Walsh said. "Ms. Rodriguez, what you've described sounds like a conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, and possibly money laundering. If we can verify your account, this could be one of the largest financial crimes we've prosecuted this year." The magnitude of what Walsh was describing made Maya feel dizzy. She'd been thinking of Blackstone's scheme as a business crime, white-collar misconduct that would be handled through fines and regulatory sanctions. But Walsh was talking about criminal prosecutions, prison sentences, the kind of federal cases that dominated news cycles. "What happens next?" Maya asked. "We're going to need you to wear a recording device," Walsh said. "If Blackstone Industries announces the acquisition as planned, there will likely be follow-up meetings at the Meridian Club. We need to document those conversations to build our case." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. "You want me to spy on them?" "We want you to continue doing your job while helping us gather evidence of ongoing crimes," Rivera said. "You wouldn't be in any danger. We'd have agents nearby, and you'd have backup communication methods if anything went wrong." Maya thought about Harrison Blackstone's cold eyes, about the casual way he'd discussed destroying thousands of lives, about the vast resources at his disposal and the ruthlessness he'd already demonstrated. The idea of deliberately deceiving him, of recording his conversations while serving him coffee, felt like volunteering to walk into a lion's den. But she also thought about Diego, frantically preparing documents in a desperate attempt to keep a job that might already be doomed. She thought about Elena, working 3 jobs to support her family and save for art school. She thought about all the Meridian employees who had no idea their company was about to be dismantled by criminals who saw their lives as nothing more than collateral damage in a profit-maximizing scheme. "If I do this," she said, "if I help you gather evidence, what happens to me afterward? Will I be able to keep working? Will my family be safe?" Walsh leaned forward, her expression serious but compassionate. I won't lie to you. Being a witness in a high-profile financial crime case isn't easy, but the law provides significant protections for whistleblowers, including financial compensation and legal support. And if we're successful in stopping this fraud, you'll have saved thousands of jobs and potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in investor losses. Maya stared out the window at the city skyline, at the glass towers where people like Harrison Blackstone make decisions that ripple through countless lives. Somewhere in one of those buildings, executives were probably meeting at that very moment to finalize the acquisition that would make them wealthy while destroying communities and families. She'd spent her whole life feeling powerless against systems that seemed designed to keep people like her on the margins. But now, for the first time, she had the opportunity to fight back, to use what she'd learned to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. "Okay," Maya said, turning back to face the agents. "Tell me what I need to do."
The recording device was smaller than Maya had expected, barely larger than a button, designed to be sewn into the lining of her uniform jacket where it would be invisible to casual observation. Agent Walsh had spent an hour teaching Maya how to activate and deactivate it, how to position herself for optimal audio quality, and what to do if she felt unsafe. "Remember," Walsh had said, "you're not trying to trick anyone into confessing. You're just documenting conversations that would happen anyway. Act normal, do your job, and let them talk." But nothing about Tuesday evening felt normal as Maya walked through the employee entrance of the Meridian Club. The familiar sounds of the kitchen, sizzling pans, shouted orders, the constant clatter of plates and silverware seemed muted and distant. Her colleagues moved around her with their usual efficiency, but Maya felt like she was watching them from behind glass, separated by the weight of what she was carrying. "You okay, girl?" Elena asked, appearing beside Maya as she tied her apron. "You seemed really off lately." "Just tired," Maya said, forcing a smile. "You know how it is." Elena studied her face with the concern of a true friend. "If something's wrong, you know you can tell me, right? Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Maya's chest tightened with guilt. Elena deserved to know what was happening, deserved the chance to protect herself if Maya's plan went wrong. But involving Elena would put her friend at risk, and Maya had already made enough dangerous decisions for both of them. "I know. I promise I'm okay." Gerald Hoffman appeared in the kitchen doorway, checking his watch with the perpetual anxiety of someone responsible for maintaining the club's reputation for perfection. "Rodriguez, you're assigned to the Wellington room tonight. Private dinner for 4, starting at 8. Maya's heart stopped. The Wellington room was the same private dining space where she'd overheard Blackstone's conversation 3 days ago. The same mahogany table, the same crystal chandelier, the same acoustic properties that had allowed her to catch fragments of criminal conspiracy over the sound of clinking silverware. "Who's the party?" Maya asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Blackstone and Associates. Same group as Saturday night. They specifically requested you as their server." Maya felt the recording device against her ribs like a cold spot of metal, a reminder of the federal agents who were waiting in a van 3 blocks away, monitoring her location through GPS and ready to respond if she sent a distress signal. She had imagined wearing the device during some future meeting, after she'd had time to prepare mentally for the deception. She hadn't expected to be thrown into the situation immediately. "Of course," Maya said. "I'll take good care of them." At 7:45, Maya stood outside the Wellington room with a tray of appetizers, listening to the familiar voices through the heavy door. Harrison Blackstone was speaking in the same confident tone she remembered, but there was an edge of excitement in his voice that suggested good news. Maya knocked softly and entered the room, placing appetizer plates with practiced precision while her heart hammered against her chest. The 4 men barely acknowledged her presence. Blackstone focused on documents spread across the table, Morrison studying his tablet, Sterling typing on his phone, and Chen reviewing what appeared to be legal contracts. "The announcement went perfectly this morning," Blackstone was saying, as Maya arranged silverware. Meridian stock jumped 12% on the acquisition news, exactly as we predicted. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she set down Chen's appetizer plate. The acquisition had been announced, which meant Blackstone's scheme was now in motion. Thousands of Meridian employees had probably spent the day celebrating what they thought was good news for their company, unaware that their new owner was planning to dismantle everything they'd built. What about employee retention during the transition? We need to maintain operations long enough to complete the asset transfers. Standard approach, Blackstone said, cutting into his appetizer. Retention bonuses for key personnel, vague promises about growth opportunities, maybe some company-wide meetings about exciting new directions. Most employees will stay put for 6 months if they think their jobs are secure. That's all the time we need.
Maya thought about Diego, probably working late at that very moment, putting together reports and presentations in the belief that his dedication would help secure his future at the company. The idea of him sitting in a company meeting listening to lies about exciting new directions while executives planned to destroy his career made her feel sick with rage. The beauty of the Meridian situation, Chen was saying, is that their employees are genuinely talented. When we eventually downsize, we'll be able to recommend the best people to other firms in exchange for consultation fees and future business relationships. Everyone wins. Maya nearly dropped the water pitcher she was holding. Chen was talking about selling Meridian's employees like commodities, treating their careers and expertise as resources to be harvested and redistributed for Blackstone Industries' benefit. "Except Meridian's employees," Sterling said with a chuckle, "but that's not really our concern, is it?" The casual cruelty of the comment, the way Sterling dismissed the lives of thousands of people as irrelevant to his calculations, crystallized everything Maya had come to understand about the world these men inhabited. They lived in a reality where other people existed only as variables in financial equations, where human suffering was acceptable collateral damage in the pursuit of maximum profit. Maya excused herself to retrieve the main course, stepping into the service corridor where she could breathe normally for a moment. The recording device had captured everything she'd hoped for: detailed admissions of securities fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and a timeline that proved premeditation. Agent Walsh would have more than enough evidence to build a criminal case. But Maya also realized that simply gathering evidence wasn't enough. These men were still moving forward with their plan, still destroying lives in real time while federal investigators built their case. Diego and thousands of other Meridian employees were still at risk, still unaware that their futures were being decided by criminals who saw them as expendable. Maya pulled out her phone and sent a text message to a number Agent Walsh had given her. Package delivered, contents confirmed, requesting immediate action. Within minutes, her phone buzzed with a response. Understood. Maintain position. Action in progress. Maya returned to the Wellington room with the main course, serving each plate while the men continued their discussion of asset liquidation and employee manipulation. But something had changed in the atmosphere of the room. Blackstone kept glancing at his phone, his expression growing more tense with each passing minute. "Gentlemen," Blackstone said suddenly, setting down his fork, "we may have a problem." Maya's blood went cold. Had they discovered the recording device? Had someone spotted the federal agents waiting outside? She continued clearing appetizer plates, trying to appear invisible while her mind raced through escape scenarios. "We received a call from our SEC contact," Blackstone continued. "The timeline may have accelerated. There's a possibility that news of the investigation could surface within weeks rather than months." Morrison looked up sharply. "How is that possible? Our information was solid." "Someone leaked," Sterling said grimly. "The question is who and how much they know." Maya forced herself to continue clearing dishes, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the plates. They didn't know her specifically, but they knew their security had been compromised. The careful plan she'd developed with Agent Walsh suddenly felt inadequate and dangerous. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Blackstone said. "Morrison, I want the real estate assessments completed by Friday. Sterling, draft the restructuring paperwork immediately. Chen, start identifying which personnel we want to retain and which divisions will liquidate first. Maya realized that her intervention might have the opposite effect she'd intended. Instead of stopping Blackstone's scheme, the threat of exposure was causing him to move faster, to compress months of careful asset stripping into weeks of frantic activity that would be even more devastating for Meridian's employees. What about operational security going forward? Chen asked. If someone's feeding information to investigators, we need to assume all our communications are potentially compromised. Agreed, Blackstone said. No more emails, no more phone calls, no more meetings in public venues. We handle everything in person, in private locations, with minimal documentation. Maya's heart sank as she realized the implications of what Blackstone was saying. If they moved their operations away from the Meridian Club, away from any location where she could monitor their activities, her ability to help federal investigators would disappear. The recording device would become useless, and the case against Blackstone would depend entirely on the evidence she'd already gathered. As Maya prepared to leave the room with the cleared appetizer plates, her phone buzzed with an urgent text message from Diego. Maya, something's happening at work, security guards everywhere, people being told not to delete files or talk to media. I'm scared. Maya stared at the message, realizing that Agent Walsh had moved faster than expected. The SEC was already taking action, probably serving warrants and seizing documents at Meridian's offices. Diego was witnessing the beginning of a federal investigation in real time, without any preparation or warning about what was happening. Maya quickly typed back, "Stay calm, do exactly what security tells you. Don't discuss anything with coworkers. Call me when you get home." In the Wellington room, the four men had abandoned their dinner and were speaking in urgent, hushed tones. Maya could catch only fragments of their conversation, but it was clear they were planning to accelerate their timeline dramatically in response to the perceived threat. "We move everything tonight," Blackstone was saying. "Every liquid asset, every transferable contract, every piece of movable inventory. By morning, I want the shell company structure activated and all valuable resources beyond the reach of federal seizure." Maya realized she was witnessing something unprecedented, the real-time response of sophisticated criminals to federal intervention. These men weren't panicking or abandoning their scheme. Instead, they were adapting, accelerating, treating law enforcement as just another obstacle to be overcome through careful planning and superior resources. As Maya finally left the Wellington room, carrying a tray of untouched main courses, she understood that her role in this story was far from over. She'd provided federal investigators with evidence of criminal conspiracy, but Blackstone and his associates were still moving forward with plans that would devastate thousands of lives. The real battle was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Maya stood in the lobby of the federal building, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as news vans lined the street outside. Camera crews jostled for position while reporters prepared for the evening broadcasts that would carry news of the largest securities fraud case in the city's recent history. Harrison Blackstone, James Morrison, Robert Sterling, and Marcus Chen had all been arrested that morning on charges that included conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. Agent Walsh appeared beside Maya, carrying a cup of coffee and looking tired but satisfied. "Nervous about the press conference?" Maya nodded. In 20 minutes, she would stand before dozens of reporters and cameras to explain how a waitress had uncovered and helped prevent a $500 million fraud scheme. The SEC had decided to publicize her role as a way to encourage other whistleblowers, but Maya still felt overwhelmed by the attention. "I keep thinking about all the people who almost lost their jobs," Maya said. "If I hadn't overheard that conversation, if I hadn't decided to act." "But you did act. That's what matters. Do you know how many people walk past crimes every day and convince themselves it's not their responsibility? You chose to get involved when it would have been easier to stay silent."
Through the lobby windows, Maya could see Diego approaching the building wearing his best suit and carrying a folder of documents. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd been working closely with federal investigators, helping them understand Meridian's financial structures and identify which documents had been falsified. Instead of losing his job, he'd become a key witness in the prosecution case, with the SEC offering him immunity in exchange for his cooperation.
Miss Rodriguez? A young woman with a press badge approached Maya nervously. I'm Jennifer Park from the Financial Tribune. Could I ask you a few questions before the press conference? Maya had been giving interviews for days, telling her story to journalists, congressional investigators, and law enforcement officials who were trying to understand how the fraud had been uncovered. Each time, she struggled to explain the decision-making process that had led her from overhearing a conversation to wearing a federal recording device. I wasn't trying to be a hero, Maya told Park, the same thing she'd told every other reporter. I was trying to protect my brother and thousands of other people who had no idea they were in danger. When you have information that can prevent harm, you have a responsibility to act on it. Diego entered the lobby and caught Maya's eye, giving her an encouraging smile. Behind him came Elena, who had been granted time off from all 3 of her jobs to attend the press conference. Elena still didn't know the full extent of Maya's involvement in the investigation, but she'd figured out that her friend had played a major role in exposing the fraud scheme. I'm so proud of you, Elena said, hugging Maya tightly. I always knew you were destined for something bigger than serving coffee to rich people. Maya laughed, though she felt tears threatening to spill over. I'm still serving coffee to rich people. I just helped put some of the worst ones in prison first. The truth was more complicated. Maya had lost her job at the Meridian Club immediately after her role in the investigation became public, just as she'd expected. Gerald Hoffman had called her personally to explain that the club could no longer employ someone who had violated client confidentiality, regardless of the circumstances or legality of her actions. But the SEC's whistleblower program had provided Maya with financial compensation that dwarfed her previous income. As a percentage of the funds recovered through the investigation, Maya would receive over $2 million, enough to pay off her family's medical debts, complete her college education, and start the kind of life she'd always dreamed of. More importantly, the case had attracted attention from advocacy organizations, law firms, and financial institutions that were interested in hiring someone with Maya's combination of analytical skills and moral courage. She'd received job offers from 3 different firms, each offering salaries that seemed almost impossibly high compared to her previous wages. Maya Rodriguez? Agent Rivera appeared at her elbow, looking professional despite the chaos of media attention surrounding the case. They're ready for you in the conference room. Maya took a deep breath and followed Rivera through security checkpoints and down corridors lined with official photographs of past SEC commissioners. The press conference room was packed with reporters, camera operators, and government officials who had worked on various aspects of the investigation. At the front of the room, a podium bore the SEC seal and faced rows of folding chairs filled with journalists who would carry Maya's story to national audiences. She'd never imagined that her decision to eavesdrop on a private dinner conversation would lead to standing before federal microphones explaining financial crimes to people who made a living understanding complex business transactions. SEC Chairman Robert Martinez introduced Maya as a courageous citizen whose actions prevented one of the largest financial frauds in recent memory. The applause that followed felt surreal, hundreds of people clapping for a woman who had been invisible to most of them just weeks earlier. Maya stepped to the podium and looked out at the sea of faces, reporters with notebooks ready, camera operators adjusting their equipment, government officials nodding encouragement. Somewhere in the crowd, she could see Diego and Elena, both beaming with pride and excitement. 3 weeks ago, Maya began, I was a waitress who had dropped out of college, working 2 jobs to help support my family.
I didn't have any special expertise in financial crimes, and I certainly never imagined I would be standing here talking to reporters about securities fraud."
She paused, gathering her thoughts and trying to distill the complex emotions of the past month into words that would make sense to people who had never faced the kinds of choices she'd confronted. "But I learned something important through this experience. You don't have to be wealthy or powerful or highly educated to make a difference when you witness wrongdoing. You just have to be willing to act on your conscience, even when it's difficult and scary." Maya went on to describe the timeline of events, from overhearing the initial conversation to working with federal investigators to gather evidence. She explained how Harrison Blackstone's scheme would have destroyed thousands of jobs while enriching a small group of executives who already had more money than they could spend in multiple lifetimes. "The men I overheard talking about this fraud spoke about real people as if they were just numbers on a spreadsheet," Maya said. "They discussed destroying careers and communities the way you might talk about rearranging furniture. That casual cruelty, that complete disregard for human suffering is what motivated me to act." During the question and answer session that followed, reporters asked about Maya's future plans, her thoughts on corporate accountability, and her advice for other potential whistleblowers. Maya answered as honestly as she could, emphasizing that her decision to come forward had been motivated by love for her family and community, rather than any desire for recognition or financial reward. "I would encourage anyone who witnesses financial crimes to report them," Maya said, in response to a question about encouraging other whistleblowers. "But I also understand why people hesitate. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, when your family depends on your income, taking on powerful corporations feels impossible. The system needs to do more to protect people who come forward with information about crimes." After the press conference ended, Maya found herself surrounded by reporters requesting individual interviews, law enforcement officials thanking her for her cooperation, and advocacy groups interested in using her story to promote whistleblower protections. The attention was overwhelming, but also gratifying in ways she hadn't expected. For years, Maya had felt invisible in a world dominated by wealthy and powerful people who seemed to operate by completely different rules. She'd served their food, cleaned up their messes, and listened to them discuss deals worth more money than she would see in a lifetime, always aware that her opinions and experiences were irrelevant to their decision-making processes. Now, suddenly, her voice mattered. Her story was being told on national news programs, her insights were being sought by congressional investigators, and her actions had directly prevented crimes that would have harmed thousands of innocent people. 6 months later, Maya walked across the stage at Metropolitan Community College, accepting her diploma in business administration as her parents, Diego and Elena, cheered from the audience. She'd been able to return to school full-time thanks to the SEC Whistleblower Award, and she'd completed her degree in record time by testing out of several courses based on the practical financial education she'd received during the Blackstone investigation. The dean who handed Maya her diploma whispered, "We're honored to have you as a graduate. You've shown that education and courage can change the world." After the ceremony, Maya's family gathered for dinner at Rosie's Diner, the same place where Maya had spent that anxious Sunday morning researching Harrison Blackstone and trying to figure out how to act on what she'd overheard. Rosie herself had prepared a special meal to celebrate Maya's graduation and her acceptance to graduate school at the State University, where she would pursue a master's degree in forensic accounting. "I still can't believe my little sister brought down a billionaire," Diego said, raising his glass of iced tea in a toast. "To Maya, who proved that doing the right thing actually can make a difference."
Diego had been promoted twice at Meridian since the federal investigation concluded. The company had undergone massive restructuring under new leadership with a focus on transparency and ethical business practices. Diego was now working directly with federal regulators to help design new oversight procedures that would prevent the kind of accounting manipulation that had nearly destroyed the company. Elena had also benefited from Maya's newfound connections in the financial world. One of the law firms that had courted Maya for employment had instead hired Elena as a paralegal, offering her better pay and more regular hours than her previous collection of part-time jobs. She was finally able to save money for art school while supporting her family.
The crazy thing, Elena said, is that none of this would have happened if you hadn't been brave enough to speak up. All those people who kept their jobs at Meridian, all the investors who didn't lose their savings, all the communities that didn't get destroyed, they have no idea that a waitress from our neighborhood saved their lives. Maya smiled, thinking about the ripple effects that had spread from her decision to contact Sarah Chen that Monday morning. Harrison Blackstone and his associates were facing decades in federal prison. Meridian Corp had been restructured and strengthened rather than dismantled. Thousands of employees had kept their jobs and their dignity. But the changes went beyond the immediate case. Maya's story had inspired new legislation to strengthen whistleblower protections, particularly for service workers who might overhear sensitive information but lack the resources to report crimes safely. She testified before Congress about the need for better support systems for people who witness financial crimes, and several of her recommendations had been incorporated into pending bills. 2 years later, Maya stood in the conference room of Chen & Associates, the forensic accounting firm where she worked as a senior investigator. The walls were lined with awards and newspaper clippings documenting the firm's success in uncovering corporate fraud and financial crimes. Maya's framed diploma hung beside commendations from federal law enforcement agencies and thank you letters from victims of financial crimes who had been helped by the firm's investigations. "The Pemberton case files just arrived," said David Chen, Sarah Chen's husband and Maya's direct supervisor at the firm. "Securities fraud, potentially involving offshore money laundering. The patterns look similar to some of the Blackstone schemes." Maya smiled as she opened the files, her expert eye immediately spotting the telltale signs of financial manipulation that would have been invisible to her just 3 years ago. "I can see at least 4 red flags already," she said confidently. "Give me 48 hours and I'll have a complete analysis ready for the SEC." As she settled into her work, Maya reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her here. From a struggling waitress who overheard a conversation by chance to one of the country's most respected forensic accountants. She'd testified before Congress, helped pass new whistleblower protection laws, and personally prevented over $2 billion in financial fraud. But most importantly, she'd proven that courage doesn't require wealth or power, it just requires the willingness to act when you witness wrongdoing. Maya Rodriguez had found her voice, and she was using it to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, one case at a time. Harrison Blackstone was serving 15 years in federal prison. Maya Rodriguez was saving the world, one fraud case at a time. Sometimes the good guys really do win.